Phil Harding.
Here we are.
Yeah,
Hi, yes. Interview number 2, 10 years later, is it?
So, I missed the first one.
He was one of the originals.
Was he?
Oh,
Thank
you very much.
Did you interview him then?
Yeah, but with the camera off, I was off camera. But seriously, it's people like you that help make it all get set up.
There's a sort of postage size stamp, quick time, 1 frame per second
That's
video
the one.
views there. Excellent.
Which many people have seen.
I managed to miss it, I'm sorry about that.
That's fine, man. Don't worry.
Haven't done my research properly, clearly. Oh well. Well, tell us how you got into the business then, Phil. Did you train musically or in any related thing when you were at school? Did you have musical instrument lessons?
Yeah, I suppose I did. Yeah, I was quite late coming to music, in as much as I had a piano at home.
Musical parents?
And mother played piano a little bit, as an East End mother would. We were in Romford in Essex. I went to school in Dagenham in Essex with my mate. And at 14, had an encouraging music teacher that then started giving me lessons.
Right.
And funnily enough, I always thought that I only got to grade 2, but I found a grade 3 certificate amongst my papers the other day. So, hey, grade 3 on the piano. And I found myself all these years later going back to piano lessons because I've forgotten how to read the dots.
Oh, right.
And I thought...
you actually had lessons again, have you?
I'm having lessons again at the moment,
right.
yeah, and playing a bit of the sort of classical stuff,
How
which,
marvellous.
having left that behind as a 16-year-old, and gone totally into kind of, the rock and the pop,
Yeah.
and thought, I've got to that grade, that's enough to ground me, as it were.
Yeah.
So as a 16-year-old, decided that didn't want to stay on for A-levels, had started playing in bands, so piano was my main instrument at that point. I thought, well, if I can possibly get a job in a studio, that would better my chances.
And what did you know about studios at the age of 16? I mean, did you?
Nothing. Absolutely zero. Zero. Didn't own a tape recorder at home, knew nothing about recording whatsoever.
I mean, what gave you the idea about working in a studio then? Do you remember?
Just the fact I was a musician and started writing songs, had a band together. I thought, well, that'll be fun. I think at the time I might have had a Saturday job in an electrical shop or something, and heard someone like Jethro Tull on the radio being interviewed and talking about having their own studio.
Yeah.
I thought, that sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Let's go for a bit of that if we can.
So how did you actually make this happen then?
So then I said it to the careers officer.
Right.
In Eastbrook School, Dagenham, Essex, and looked at me as though I was a complete lunatic.
Yeah.
But sent me off to a couple of interviews in central London.
Really?
What must have been a very early, this was 1973, a very early video filming studio.
Good heavens.
Which, hard to believe these days that they existed back then, but obviously they did.
Yeah.
And then he sent me to a place, can't remember the name of it, on Wardour Street,
Right.
which was a cable and connector manufacturer and seller.
Yeah.
And they were there for many more years, but basically they said to me, look, we don't think maybe you're technical enough for this job, but we hear that the studio behind us, which was the Marquee, has got a space for a T-boy assistant.
Right.
So got straight on the phone when I got home to the Marquee studio manager, Jerry Collins was his name. Managed to get myself interviewed the next day. 20th of 20 people that they intended to interview, and 24 hours later got the job.
How marvellous.
How your life can turn around in 24 hours.
Yeah.
And walked into this kind of wonderful world. I mean, I was a completely bemused 16-year-old. And, unlike, as we see here these days, the T-boy assistants in most studios, large studios in those days, were in a different room.
Yeah.
So your engineer, producer, musicians obviously in the studio, and a tape room. I mean, we still have machine rooms, but the assistant was in that machine room, but a bit bigger. A machine room that was probably this size, with Aitken monitoring, all the tape machines there, intercom into the studio, all the tea making facilities in the kitchen.
So the engineer would press the button on the intercom and go, Phil, can you drop this in punch in at the third chorus on track 4?
If you were trusted enough to punch in, but he did have a machine remote in his room as well, so he would generally do most of the punching in, and you would sort of change tapes, run around getting tea, sandwiches and so on, and be called out to set up microphones and so on when they needed changing. So and that was.
And who was the engineer you were generally working with, or were there a mixture? Was it in-house?
Yeah, it was all in-house engineers in those days. The three engineers that I trained under were Jeff Calver.
Oh yeah.
Phil Dunn, who engineered for Gus Dudgeon largely, and a guy called Will Roper.
Yeah. And who did you learn the most from?
Probably equally Phil and Jeff.
Yeah.
Probably technically from Jeff, and probably tips, hints, and how to deal with clients from Phil.
Yeah.
Phil was quite a character.
Yeah.
Used to arrive in a full suit with a bow tie, like it was still the 60s.
Yeah.
And that was his image, and that was, he he'd smoke dope and he'd do all the rest of the things, and be a great friend to all the musicians and producers. He wasn't a straight-laced character.
No, yeah.
As he was just flamboyant.
Yeah, brilliant.
And of course the very flamboyant Gus Dudgeon, as we remember him. He's wonderful flamboyant dress sense. Just like he and Phil were a match made in heaven. But Phil was a great engineer. He'd cut corners more than you'd see someone like Jeff cutting corners, as it were, and get results. And I think that the art of doing that put me in good stead for later on when I was doing a lot of fast pop turnaround work. Where,
so did you get kind of promoted to engineer at the Marquee at some point?
Yeah. I was 12 years at the Marquee, so
wow.
4 or 5 years of training, and there were 2 other tape ops at the time that I arrived, so they were ahead of me, as it were, in the pecking order. John Eden was one of them. He went on to engineer for Pip Williams and went on to produce himself. And the other guy was Steve Holroyd, who went on to do quite a lot of stuff, engineered for Gus, and has ended up working for Universal in America.
Right.
So a lot of people trained there at that time, still in and around the industry.
So you must have done a huge variety of different projects when you started engineering.
Yeah, I mean, 73 I started there, so 4 years later, 77, 78, in the middle of the disco boom and the start of the punk explosion.
Yeah.
So quite something to, and quite, those things quite diverse.
Yeah.
When I first started, we were still in the process of the 3-hour session.
Right.
10
that was fairly strictly regimented.
Yeah, 10 till 1 backing tracks, 2 till 5 overdubs. After that would be vocals and mixing, and this continuous stream of session musicians coming through who had their own roadies, and it was quite quite a little routine and factory where you had to learn to work fast, and the toughest sessions were, we used to do a lot of those kind of copy Top of the Pops albums, which were like a 3-day affair, often across maybe a weekend, but certainly only 3 days.
And when you were doing those, did you copy the original record onto the multi-track to play along to?
No, the original record was always in the control room for the producer to. But usually the producers of those were orchestral or arrangers of some kind that had they'd had to get it done in 3 days. Everything was scored out.
Yeah.
But as an assistant, which rings true in my memory, is everything would go down at once.
Right.
Orchestra and band.
Wow.
And it wasn't a massive studio, the Marquee,
no.
so a little kind of
string section,
drum booth in the corner, and everything as screened off as possible, and orchestra out in the open space.
Amazing.
And all of that would go down in the sort of the first day, then all the vocals the next day, then all the mixing the third day. That was it, job done.
Yeah.
That's great way to learn.
Brilliant.
The great thing about the punk revolution was that bands would come in, and part of the revolution was to have no producer.
Yeah.
So it was like, book us a studio, we'll have whoever the house engineer is, and we'll produce ourselves.
Yeah.
So I went through some very hairy sessions. The one that sticks out in my memory most is the first Killing Joke album, Requiem.
Oh right, yeah.
And A&R guy would turn up with a couple of crates of beer and champagne the first day of recording, and no instruction other than good luck Phil, here's the band, off we go. You know, and I remember, you know, wonderful guys, all wonderful guys, but with no central kind of leading figure either in the band or in.
Was it expected that you would kind of produce then?
Not. It was expected that I would technically and creatively get down what the band wanted, you know, best I could.
Yeah.
And it was expected that the band, you know, could and should produce themselves.
Yeah.
But the their idea of production was that each member would come into the control room, you know, and stare at me from that side of the desk during a playback, screaming at me to get whatever their instrument was louder than anyone else's. Especially the keyboard player, singer, jazz.
Yeah.
Scream at me.
Yeah.
Absolutely scream at me, and it's like, we're only recording, you know, it's not Final Balance, guys. Okay. But it was good fun, you know. I really enjoyed it. Youth was in the band, and it was quite an exciting time, you know. You know, for instance, again on that album, we ended up using the Marquee upstairs mix room to do the mixes, and no one liked the mixes that we did. And I was convinced that it was only because we'd all got ourselves mentally into this space and playback environment while during recording, and everyone was like really happy with that, from band through to record company through to friends popping in and out and so on. And then this slightly more sterile, smaller room that we had upstairs just didn't suit it. And you know, politically, I had to kind of go back to the record company and say, look, I really think we've made a mistake by moving upstairs, and I think the reason that the band and yourselves are not happy is because we've moved out of the environment where we were happy. Right.
That was very astute of you to.
Yeah, I think early sort of, and I persuaded the studio to give us a day to mix downstairs. Right. I think, you know, without charging the client, and I'd said to the studio, look, I think we can get the whole album mixed here if maybe we you know, we're allowed to go back downstairs.
Was there any automation on any of these consoles?
Yeah, this was on MCI. We were on the MCI J500, which had a kind of a you know, its crude version of
bouncing it from track to track.
Yeah, with the code from track to track, and a bit of fader movement and mutes on and off. So you could do a bit. Yeah. And we came out with a much better mix on that day and finished the whole album.
Right. We didn't mix the whole album in a day, did you?
No. But then went through the whole, and then part of the punk revolution was to put no credits on the album. Yeah. So neither the studio nor myself were ever credited for anything on the album. But there you go. I can assure you I was there. Yeah. And did it. Mike Stott, Matt Aitken and Pete Waterman were talking about their own studio setup. And talking about, you know, myself going with them, and we took the maintenance engineer Mike Pickin, and we took 2 assistants. Right, wow. And it was quite obviously disruptive to the Marquee. Yeah, broke my contract, got out of there, and became chief engineer at PWL Studios, the Vineyard in the Borough. Yeah. Which was previously the Vineyard Studios. Okay. And they were in the process of kind of turning that round into a new studio setup. So it was just the right time for a team like us to go in and say, right, you know, we don't want to hire the studio. We want to, you know, Pete wanted to pay a rent, take it over, have our own equipment. Right. Chose the SSL. Yeah. Obvious choice at that time. 1985. This was. SSL was the console of choice for pop production, really, and that's what we were doing. So, and never looked back. Basically, from that point onwards.
So you were pretty much mix engineer for most of the projects then?
Yeah, it was only when it was kind of something major going on, like the Dead or Alive for CBS at the time was considered a major project for the guys. So I engineered the recording of that as well as mixing. Certainly the first 3 or 4 tracks, but where possible, because even at that time I was doing early productions and had other mixes going on. Yeah. And wasn't always available. So, and Pete and the boys were generally quite happy to you know, use other recording engineers. Yeah. The recording engineers that we had at PWL were very much guys that we had trained up. You know, from being assistants. Yeah. And anyone that came in with some experience were other mix engineers. Dave Ford and Pete Hammond in particular. The only kind of outside guy that that had some experience that came in was Mark Maguire.
Yeah.
He came over from Abbey Road, but mainly had been, you know, learning his trade there as an assistant. And I think most of the other people we trained up. Yeah, so it's quite, you know, became quite a routine of, hence the nickname Factory, the Hit Factory. You know, factory-like production of.
So at this point, what was the style of music that you aspired to work on, and was the PWL sound something that you feel you helped create, or was it something that you were copying, or, you know, what guided you, and what, you know, what was your take on it all?
Well, I was there from day one, so I did help create it, and the creation of the various genres of sound that we went through. I mean, it was all pop dance, but, you know, we went from sort of 125 BPM high energy disco down to Princess R&B through to Chicago house.
Yeah.
You know, we went through lots of different styles whilst we were there.
But
although people tend to say there's one overall sound.
And it was quite a different sound from records that had been in the charts up to that point.
Yeah, and each time there was one of those changes, I was generally, you know, quite involved in helping to shape.
What guided you then? Did you go out clubbing and listen to?
No, it was always Pete.
Right.
Pete was the one that went clubbing.
Yeah.
You know, still DJ'd.
Did he never drag you out of an evening and say, "Come and have a listen to this"?
No, really. He'd bring it in.
He'd just bring the records in.
He'd bring stuff in. I mean, Pete would spend his weekends. He'd go back up north on a Friday. He'd spend his Saturday morning doing a radio show on the local Liverpool radio station. He'd spend his Saturday afternoon in an independent record shop in Manchester, seeing what people are coming in. And he'd spend his Friday and Saturday evening in clubs, either DJing or going to clubs, and then feeding that back into the team on a Monday. Because
the impression I got, you got left to your own devices to do a lot of these 12-inch mixes.
Yes.
Which is a very club-specific format, you know, in terms of the song structure.
And it was quite strange for someone like myself, a sort of, you know, a trained engineer, you know, non-DJ, to be doing that. And sometimes if I'd go to, like, you know, DJ conventions, or I got asked to judge at the DMC DJ Championship one year, you know, and thank God, you know, I was surrounded by DJs, people like Ben LeBron that were remixers but coming from being DJs and so on, that would tell me what on earth's going on. But it was just one of those things, you know. Myself and Ian kind of just got into a routine of, you know, engineer, producers, programmer. Ian was a great musician and programmer, and just the enthusiasm to do that stuff.
But what gave you the judgment to know where to put the breakdown in the 12-inch things? Was it purely copying other records that did it already, or was it what?
I suppose so. Yeah, I mean, you know, we started off basing the Divine sound on Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Yeah. You know, and then Dead or Alive came in and said we want to sound like Divine and Hazel Dean. You know, and each time you're either, you know, copying someone else's sound or your own sound. It just develops as you go along, and then you end up with, you know, hopefully your own sound. Yeah. And developing, you know, routines where you know what the DJs want, you know, and you give them a good chance at the beginning to mix in, a good chance to mix out in the middle, and every opportunity to go through to the end, but then to still mix out. You know, it's not that's not brain surgery really, but I think increasingly myself and Ian did used to go out to clubs. Once we kind of were the SAWB team production wise, but we were very much you know, high level remixes throughout the 80s that did a lot of non-PWL stuff. You know, from Jesus Jones through to Debbie Harry and Pet Shop Boys and all the rest of it. We would regularly go over to the New Music Seminar in New York, which became a good learning ground for both what was going on, how our records mixed into other records that were going on, and then the great networking thing of, you know, meeting all the sort of A&R guys and the managers and so on, who, you know, unless they come down to the studio, you tend to become a bit faceless to them. You know, and so I do recommend to people that you know, no matter how successful or busy you are, you've got to get out of the box sometimes, and let people know that you're you do exist and you're someone that you know, is okay to get on with, and you know, they can talk to you, because often you get to that stage, and most of the discussions between those the business and the creative A&R guys go through your manager.
Yeah.
You know, and a strict manager will actually discourage them from talking direct to you, which is quite strange sometimes for both for them and for yourself. So
I know you're mostly mixing, but
well,
before auto-tune was invented, how
how
did you cope with all that? What were the tricks?
Well, you know, you'd always hope that the singer was up to it and could stay in tune. You know, there's two things there really. You'd always rely on having your session singers come in and give you plenty of backup.
Yeah.
You know, which would generally only leave you with an exposed couple of verses to deal with. You know, to get really down to the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
And with the as I refer to it in my book about PWO, and look, George is going to hold it up for us. But we ended up with just this one microphone, the Cowrex Soundfield microphone, which was an interesting scenario. But
that doesn't help you singing, too.
No, it had a great sound, and it seemed to work for everyone.
Yes.
And you know, Mike Stock would generally be producing the vocal sessions,
and you really did use that mic all the time.
Yeah.
You sort of read it on the back of the sleeve and you go, I bet.
That was the only vocal, only mic that we had capable of. Yeah. We might have had a Shaw 57 sitting around, but that was about it.
Yeah.
And
we didn't record all the B format surround signals, right?
No, just the front stereo format that we would put down to mono.
Yes.
You know, bringing it up on 2 channels on the SSL.
Right.
The only time we recorded it stereo was a particular Rick Astley track on the second album, where we knew we wanted to go for a single vocal without, because the routine was to double track everything.
Yes.
Triple track if necessary, or more. So those were the type of tricks, you know, the triple tracking.
The tracking,
You know, and always, you know, if it wasn't a great vocalist, always, you know, 8 takes and then compiling it afterwards.
Syllable by syllable.
If necessary.
By bouncing tracks.
Line by line.
Did you ever use harmonisers to help with a bit of tuning or anything like that?
Only during the mix session.
Right.
Bit of brightening up on the.
And that was blending a signal in rather than trying to actually pitch change it.
Yeah. Only when the Akai came along could we do some, you know, the Akai sampler could we do some drastic pitch changing, but we didn't do that much of that. Not till Ian and I moved over here to the Strongroom really. So
and presumably it was all a bit clunky in terms of sequencing in those days. You know, I already used the Lin 9000. Now, I mean, my memory of it was that everyone said it never quite worked. The Lin 9000.
It was continually breaking down.
Right.
So there was a continual process of, like, you know, if the sequence is in there, then get it on tape while it's working. You know, and in what was mainly a 2-studio setup, as far as main studios, there were a few programming rooms as well.
Yeah.
There were possibly 4 Lin 9000s doing the rounds of, like, studio maintenance room. So that was the process. So as long as the code was solid, and obviously, no, we haven't got one in here, but we had the wonderful SRC SMPTE generator and reader. Which would be, you know, solid as a rock, and if that's solid as a rock, it's always going to drive the Lin or something else. So you'd often have guide drums on tape to start with that may not become the final drums from the Lin until the mix. And even then, nearly always, at least the kick and snare would be something locked into the AMS sample.
So I guess that was the start of pretty much sort of running things live rather than having everything recorded and then mixing.
Yeah.
Because that was always a bone of contention when in the late 80s when I started working with Cold Cut, you know, you go right, they go right, these are the drums, you'd record them, then half an hour later, we've just changed, we've printed, and you'd go around in circles like crazy, recording stuff.
Continually reprinting.
Until you sort of thought, hang on a minute, there's a better way of doing this.
Yeah, and no commitment until the mix stage, really. So, and apart from the bass and a few high-end keyboards that would need sequencing, you know, most other keyboards would literally be played live to tape.
Yeah.
You know, by Mike Stock or Matt or, you know, whoever else was around as a keyboard player. Yeah. Matt Aitken would do guitars, you know, so a lot of live played stuff would be there.
Yeah, which you don't really get the impression, presumably they were extremely tight players.
Yeah, no,
which obviously has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. Very good players. So, and only when Ian Kerner came along, which was latter end of 85, 86, willing to run the new Fairlight system, which the previous guy didn't want to run, and by the time we got on to Rick Astley, also some Mel and Kim, Ian was doing some Fairlight stuff that would again just you get it running in sync off the SRC and printed it to tape and that would be it.
Yeah.
So Ian would sequence like the strings and the brass on Never Gonna Give You Up, Rick Astley. We got a wonderful rendition on Radio 2 last year with the Steve Levine show, and Ian still has those samples to this day,
right.
and you could hear very clearly what he had done, just printing octave violins and so on, and and Steve Levine kind of proved that with a Linn 9000 and a few bits like that, they weren't difficult records to recreate. The original creation of them would be quite time consuming and had its own way of going about things. But
I suppose the things that change, we're so lazy these days because it's so easy to just dial things up, isn't it?
Yeah.
And even and the singers who can't sing that great, we've got all the tools easily available to fix.
Only twice do I ever remember having to ghost lead vocals at PWL. That was your last resort.
Yeah.
Of getting a session singer to not only do backing harmonies and so on for the chorus, but actually ghost the verse as well.
Double track it effectively, so you've got a bit of the character of the person, but then singing it in tune, mixed in.
Yeah. Bit drastic. You get to that level. Wonderful when autotune came along.
Yeah.
In the 90s.
That must have been wonderful. A day to remember.
God, But then, as it were, lower level singers could get away with making records.
Yeah. And is that when you got fed up with it then, once you started realising?
No, it's late 90s I got fed up with it, I suppose, continually. But and as we do now, you often spend a lot longer on your editing session. Okay, you've got all the tools and it's wonderful and you can get it all, snazzy and perfect, but a lot longer than you do recording.
Yeah.
Whereas, that routine used to be, okay, we'll do 8 takes and, and then immediately after vocalist has gone, you'll quickly compile that down onto 1 or 2 tracks and, and you move on. You make the commitment, you move on.
Yeah.
Whereas now, that commitment you never quite have to make it with the technology we have now. Which is great in one way, but very time consuming in another. I think there's probably many producers around in my generation that hanker for the old days where during your recording process you make the commitment that you don't look back and you move on.
Yeah.
I kind of hung the headphones up for a few years at the end of the 90s because I felt I got boy banded out.
Yeah.
After PWL it was over here at the Strongroom in the production suite. And once Ian and I had the success of E17 with their early records, and we went through the best part of 3 albums with them.
Right.
We got very much what I call industry pigeonholed.
Yeah.
Into being, it doesn't matter that we might have worked with Jesus Jones or I'd engineered the Clash or Ian used to be in Talk Talk.
Yeah.
Boy bands was all we could do as far as the industry was concerned. Talking, A&R and management and so on. And personally, it got too much for me. I mean, Ian and I craved to record a female vocalist to the point where we signed a girl ourselves to our own production company. Went out and played it to some record companies, and it was, it's not the Harding Kerner sound that we know. Sorry, we don't expect that from you. We're great fun ourselves doing it, But that for me. That's how it gotten by then. After 20 years of being like totally in the world of pop and then
you've done some of your own material, which is more sort of acoustic, haven't you?
Since then, because I think by the end of the 90s I was hankering to get back to kind of where I was in the 70s and 80s and working with a set of musicians and a real drummer instead of something programmed. I mean, we only ever recorded 1 drum kit at PWL between 1985 and 1992. Which was one sort of live drum session that Ian and I did for a project, and we set the guy up down in down in Pete's mock Italian courtyard studio, which was about the only space we had for a drummer to set up. And we had to hire the microphones in, and virtually the whole building came running down to see what on earth the bloody noise was, because it wasn't soundproofed properly down there. And
you could remember how to do it, presumably.
I could remember how. I remember when we were working actually here with Let Loose, and they had a great live drummer.
Yeah.
Almost got myself into a panic attack about recording it, because it had been so long since I'd done it with any kind of regular routine, and I think I turned up to the session with like a totally stiff neck, where I'd got kind of it turned out great, and it was fun, but there we were at PWL with a generation of assistants that never learned how to mic up a drum kit, which is one of the first things you do when you go to a college with a music technology course these days. So I had a hankering to get back to that kind of creativity, and although I didn't do it until kind of recent years, I've really enjoyed working with live musicians again. Even though I've ended up with a routine of working with them kind of one musician at a time rather than a whole band. But I have recorded a few bands recently as well, and and really enjoyed that. Because it's a very creative process for an engineer and a producer.
Well, it's a social experience as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I really used to enjoy that in the 70s and 80s. And as an engineer, your reputation was made or broken on how well you could do that. Not mainly your drum sound.
Yeah.
But the kind of guitar sound you could deliver or not.
Yeah.
So I thoroughly enjoyed doing that actually, and I was just talking about being this is the first pop project, this thing I'm doing for like 4 or 5 years, and I never thought I would go back to doing God knows how many tracks in Pro Tools or whatever pop track, but something's come along that's just caught my ear, and I could see the potential in it. So
well, presumably you can pick and choose a bit now and do what takes your fancy.
Yes. Well, glorified shed at the bottom of my garden with a Pro Tools HD setup, not enough room to record a band, but I've got a couple of studios where I'll go and record drummers or a band and so on, and then just bring it back home. And I think that's probably your fairly average seasoned industry producer engineer these days, where you've got some sort of setup at home, and I think most musicians need that as well, because certainly on the pop side of the industry at the moment. And I've done this with this production I'm doing at the moment. You expect musicians that you want to use to have their own setup, so that you can send them the files. As a pop producer, I'm talking, and say, I want 6 guitar tracks that sound something like this, and do whatever you fancy as well, and send me back the files. And you don't actually get together. So,
is that good or bad?
I think there's a bit of each. I mean. Pretty much. I mean, it gives the musician freedom. Requires that they need a certain amount of technical knowledge and ability themselves. Obviously, to run their own system and be compatible with what you send over to them. But unless they're in a different country, I will normally turn up and physically get the files off them, review what they've done, and just see if there's anything while I'm there.
Right. Yeah.
Anything extra to just chuck on.
Put another octave on in the middle eight.
Or something. Or whatever. Or a riff I had in my head that hasn't come out from them.
Right. And you're also now heavily involved in education.
Yes.
Which is presumably a passion and something that you felt.
It is. It's not something I ever sort of planned to get into. I remember it well. 1998, I did my first workshop masterclass up at Lipper in Liverpool. Which
is this something somebody asked you to do? That you thought...
well, Lipper is one of those places where they've got a lot of industry connections.
Right.
And Benny Gallagher of Gallagher and Lyle became a good friend, because a couple of his sons have been assistants for me over the years, either at PWL or here at the Strongroom. And he'd been going up, as Sir Paul McCartney does, going in and doing workshops for the students there. And he said, Phil, you really should go up and just pass your knowledge on the production side.
And what was your attitude to that? I mean, 'cause having come up through the studio system without any official course training or anything.
Yeah.
You obviously didn't.
I was interested to see what they were doing and how they were going about it.
Yeah.
I was incredibly nervous, but then, but then again, it was in a studio, so I was in a comfortable environment, and I took up a 911 track that I'd been producing,
Nice.
and just gave them an example of what it's like going from the songwriter demo through to the finished master, both on multi-track and within Cubase. And I just found the feedback that I got and the amount that I enjoyed it was not what I expected.
No. Do you think we're training too many people to become recording engineers without a prospect for a job at the end of it?
I think that that is a point that a lot of industry people are concerned about. I think that any youngster going on a vocational course out of college or a university, he's going to get a good all-round grounding, regardless of their prospects of actually getting a job as an engineer or producer. I don't think that's the main issue, really. I think the main issue is that if the students can enjoy the course and get what they want from it, and I do find a lot of the students, take from it what they want to get from it. They're often musicians that, like I say, that want to be musicians actually, but realise that they need the technology knowledge and background now to be successful musicians.
Yeah.
But I think anyone working in the music industry at the moment on any kind of creative stroke technology side has had to be an all-rounder.
Yeah.
You really, as a technologist, you have to have an understanding of music and be a musician ideally.
Well, I think that's
knowledge,
a big change that's happened, because I remember when I first got a job at Livingston, Jerry Boyes very much discouraged me from having any interest in the musical side of things at all. It was like, you're on that side of the glass. Don't talk to the guitarist about how his guitar's tuned.
Yeah.
Shut up and make the tea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
In a much nicer. Jerry's he talks very nicely to people, but
Yeah, and that very much was the way. And you do have to say to students that if you do get an opportunity to go and do some work experience or get a job in a studio environment, if people are not interested in your creative opinions, you're there to do a job and to provide a service, as everyone else in the room is.
Yeah.
And that side of it is a difficult thing to teach.
Yes.
Because then it comes down to psychology, personality.
Well, do you think there should be psychology modules in these courses, perhaps?
I think it wouldn't be a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all.
Because that's the thing they don't touch upon at all, and that's the thing
That's
I
right.
probably found the hardest to learn as I came up through the studio system.
Yeah. A couple of weeks at a Buddhist retreat.
How not to offend people.
Yeah. How do you teach someone patience?
Well, I don't know.